Morning light streamed through the kitchen window, casting gold on the polished countertops. Jessica Harrington stood in her Monterey home, hands cradling a ceramic vase, lost in the silent routine of preparation. Every Easter, for 15 years, she had hosted brunch, first when she and Thomas were still discovering each other. Then, as the years passed, out of habit and a yearning for the festive affirmation of family, the sound of scissors snipping through cellophane wrapping echoed in the quiet kitchen. Jessica clipped the stems of garden roses, arranging them between blue-white hydrangeas. The tulips were still too tight, but she coaxed them open, feeling the silky petals against her fingertips. She remembered the first time Thomas had brought her flowers, wild lilacs, plucked from a neighbor's garden, their cheeks burning with the thrill of rule-breaking romance. She smiled, her hands pausing momentarily, remembering their laughter, the endless conversations and whispered dreams shared under borrowed blankets. The refrigerator hummed in the background as Jessica moved to the cabinet for a polishing. Cloth. It had been so different then. Now, the house was silent, a comfortable, orderly haven. There was never any mess, no frantic searching for keys or bickering over grocery lists. Their conversations drifted towards schedules, weather, or polite debates about whether to repaint the guest room. They moved easily around each other, a dance of practiced steps. Jessica could anticipate Thomas's return from the university, the sound of his shoes on the gravel driveway, the gentle pause in the foyer before he hung up his jacket, the soft clink of his wedding band on the banister. Even the tiny clearing of his throat before calling her name. All familiar, all predictable. She wiped the silver tray, feeling the cool metal beneath her fingers, pausing to trace the embossed initials, J&T, gifted by friends long lost to relocations and unkept promises. The tray glinted in the morning sun, momentarily blinding her, and she blinked away a sharp pang of melancholy. What had she been hoping for, over all these years? Something unpredictable, perhaps. The clock ticked steadily from the hallway. As Jessica glanced at a faded photograph on the refrigerator, herself in a straw hat, Thomas beside her, arms linked, smiles so broad they seemed irretrievably young. The sound of her own sigh surprised her. She set the table for 6, lips pressed tightly against a sense of mild foreboding she could not explain. The clink of china against china, the scratch of silverware being arranged just so, all of it felt hollow. The house was perfect, spotless countertops gleaming, fresh flowers in every room, linens pressed with lavender-scented starch. But inside, Jessica felt unmoored, waiting for an arrival she could not yet name. The clock in the hallway chimed noon, the sound resonating through the empty rooms. Soon, guests would arrive. Thomas would bring home the extra wine, perhaps comment on her tulips. Jessica adjusted a fork, blinking at her own reflection in the silver, and wondered, for the 100th time, if she would ever manage to feel truly seen again. The metallic crunch of tires over gravel cut through the afternoon quiet, signaling Thomas's approach before Jessica saw the car. She set down her polishing cloth, feeling its dampness against her fingers, and smoothed a wrinkle in her cream-colored dress before stepping to the bay window beside the breakfast nook. The old familiarity prickled at the nape of her neck, but today there was an edge, a faint alarm ringing just beneath the surface of her awareness. The afternoon sun revealed Thomas's silver sedan pulling into their curved driveway, dust swirling at the bumper like a small cloud. Jessica's breath caught audibly as she registered a second figure, slim, feminine, seated beside him. She gripped the windowsill, feeling the cool paint beneath her palm. The car door opened with the familiar squeak Jessica had been asking Thomas to fix for months. The woman stepped out, uncertain, her dark hair caught in the breeze. Thomas circled to meet her, keys jingling in his hand. He reached for her suitcase, then hesitated, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, steadying, guiding, a gesture Jessica recognized intimately. Her pulse thudded in her ears. There had been no mention of an extra guest. She stared as her husband laughed at something the young woman said, his smile open and nervous in a way Jessica hadn't seen in years. The same smile she'd seen when he'd proposed, when they'd signed the mortgage papers for this house. Jessica's mind unraveled possibilities as she watched them through the window. A student needing a holiday meal. A research assistant from the university. But the girl's features, her dark hair, unmistakably similar arch of brow, made Jessica inexplicably wary, even as she berated herself for jealousy. As the figures moved closer, she saw them framed in sunlight, dust motes sparkling around their feet. The woman, the name Olivia, surfaced in a sudden mental clarity, though Jessica couldn't explain how, glanced uncertainly at the front door, then up at Thomas. He squeezed her shoulder, and Jessica noticed again that touch, loving, familiar, not formal. The kind of touch reserved for someone you've known for years, not a casual acquaintance. Jessica stepped back from the window, her fingers suddenly icy against her palms, her heart racing so fast she could feel it in her throat. By the time she heard keys in the lock, the metal scraping against the mechanism, she had smoothed her hair, set her face in a welcoming smile, and pressed her hands together to steady the trembling. The air inside the house felt charged and heavy, as if, behind the everyday courtesies, a storm had already begun brewing. The front door opened with a creak that seemed unnaturally loud. They entered, first Thomas, then the young woman, the scent of spring air following them inside. Thomas's eyes flicked to Jessica, a flicker of emotion. Shame. Just before, he spoke. "Jess, I'd like you to meet someone." The words hung between them for a precise, shattering moment, as the stranger, Olivia, stepped into their lives, the suitcase wheels squeaking slightly on the polished floor. The foyer felt suddenly too small, its cedar and oak warmth pressing in around Jessica as she stood opposite Thomas and his companion. The antique grandfather clock ticked loudly in the corner, marking seconds that seemed to stretch. Jessica noticed a speck of dust on the console table she'd missed earlier. "Jessica, this is Olivia." Thomas's voice trembled around the name, betraying a nervousness she rarely heard from him. With a practiced composure, Jessica extended her hand, feeling the cool, dry air against her palm. Olivia's grip was gentle, tentative, but her eyes, green, deep-set in a way that echoed Thomas's, met Jessica's frankly. "Thank you for having me," she said, her voice composed but tight, almost as if rehearsed. Jessica noticed a slight tremor in the young woman's fingers as she withdrew her hand. Within seconds, the doorbell shrilled through the tense atmosphere, making all three of them flinch. The cheerful voices of their other guests filtered through the door, neighbors from down the street, Thomas's colleague from the university, and her partner. Jessica marshaled her hostess's smile, feeling the muscles in her face strain with the effort as she stepped to open the door. "Welcome, come in," she heard herself say, surprised at how normal she sounded. The familiar hum of introductions, coats passed with the whisper of fabric, wine bottles exchanged with soft clinks, cheerful greetings, blurred around her, as her mind whirled through shock, humiliation, and an almost scientific curiosity. She studied Olivia's profile in the vestibule mirror, the same delicate nose as Thomas, the hesitant smile that lifted just slightly higher on the left. Exactly like his. Olivia hovered near the coat rack, uncertain, her dark hair tugged to one side, revealing a small silver earring that caught the light. At the dining table, she laughed awkwardly at one of Thomas's jokes, the sound a note-for-note repetition of his own. "More wine," Jessica offered, the bottle clinking against a glass as her hand trembled slightly. The neighbors nodded, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. The rich, fruity scent of Cabernet filled the air as she poured. Conversation bounced around the table, polite but probing. "How did you two meet?" Thomas's colleague asked, curiosity barely masked by etiquette. The clattering of a fork against china punctuated the question. Jessica watched Thomas wipe his brow with his napkin, leaving a small crease in the linen. Olivia smiled tightly, her hands wrapped around her water glass. "I wrote a letter a few weeks ago." The words landed in the center of the table like a physical object. People glanced up, mouths poised over forkfuls of food. Jessica sipped her wine, heart pounding against her ribs, noting the flush on Thomas's neck, the way Olivia picked at her sleeve in nervous mimicry. All through dinner preparations, Jessica noticed echoes everywhere. Olivia perched on the edge of the sofa the way Thomas did, balancing a glass just so, one finger tapping silently against the rim. She gestured with the same left hand, using careful words and quick, searching glances. Jessica felt the truth, rising within her, as undeniable as the ocean's tide. She barely heard the laughter or the compliment about her tulips. Her gaze flicked between her husband and this young woman, confirmation settling like a stone at the pit of her stomach. This was no stranger. This was, impossibly, Thomas's daughter. Even before a word was spoken about parenthood, before any test or paper could prove it, Jessica knew with a soul-deep certainty the boundaries of her quiet life were splintering, right there amid the polished silver and spring. Blooms. Jessica returned to the kitchen as her guests gathered around the dining room table. The clink of glasses and soft rise of laughter, a comforting background to her rattled thoughts. The smell of roasting meat and herbs enveloped her, familiar and grounding. She lifted the final platter, a fragrant glazed ham glistening with honey and cloves, feeling its weight and warmth through the oven mitts as she placed it at the table's center. "Dinner is served," she announced, her voice bright, betraying no sign of the tremor in her chest. She heard the scraping of chairs against the hardwood floor as the guests drifted to their seats. Thomas guided Olivia to the spot beside him, his hand hovering just above her elbow, a subtle but telling choice. Jessica took her place opposite, arranging her linen napkin in precise folds as she watched father and daughter interact, each exchanging tentative, nervous glances. The crystal water glasses caught the light, sending tiny rainbows across the tablecloth. "These carrots are divine, Jessica," her neighbor commented, the scrape of fork against china punctuating. "The praise. What's your secret?" Just a touch of honey and thyme," Jessica replied automatically, the words tasting like ash in her mouth as she struggled to focus. Conversation soon took on the shape of most holiday dinners: weather, career anecdotes, shared memories. The steady hum of voices blended with the soft classical music playing from the speakers in the corner. But beneath the surface, Jessica watched for evidence, finding it in the smallest things. The identical way Olivia ran a thumb along her fork, the expressive arch of her brow, the reserved smile when attention settled on her too long. She noticed Thomas checking on Olivia. A pitcher of water passed swiftly, an extra roll buttered without thinking. The instinct was too deep to fake. The scrape of the serving spoon against ceramic, the soft clink of Thomas's ring against his wine glass, all these sounds registered with unusual clarity as Jessica observed the unfolding scene. Their guests appeared oblivious, content to share their own stories. Thomas's colleague laughed loudly at her partner's joke, the sound cutting through Jessica's fog of awareness. Yet Jessica's attention sharpened with each exchanged glance. Between Thomas and Olivia, a growing certainty fitting itself together. The way Olivia hesitated before answering, mirroring Thomas's cadence, their shy laughter echoing each other's. Even their silences aligned. When a question lingered too long, both father and daughter sought the same escape, lowering their eyes, drawing a deep, grounding breath. The scent of cooling food mixed with the floral arrangement at the table's center. Midway through the meal, Jessica felt the weight of the role she played, to keep this gathering civil, to preserve a veneer of normalcy despite her internal earthquake. There was praise for her roasted carrots, questions about the garden's blooms, but she could hardly taste her own cooking. Her hand, hidden in her lap, tightened around her napkin, knuckles whitening as the world tumbled noiselessly behind her hostess' smile. Thomas checked Jessica's eyes across the table, apology barely hidden there. In his gaze flickered a plea for understanding, but she could not respond. The candlelight caught the silver in his temples, highlighting how much he'd aged in 15 years of marriage. With a careful, practiced grace, she excused herself as the others lingered over dessert, murmuring something about coffee. The chair legs scraped against the floor as she stood. In the sanctuary of the kitchen, her breath finally grew ragged, and for a fleeting moment Jessica stared into her own reflection in the oven door, the distorted image wavering as she wondered how she would ever stitch herself back together. The low hum of laughter and the smell of baking bread seeped into the kitchen, where Jessica stood motionless, listening to the familiar sounds of her dinner party continuing without her. The refrigerator's soft mechanical buzz provided a counterpoint to her racing thoughts. She drifted down the hallway, her heels muffled on the old carpet, feeling each fiber against her stockinged feet where the rug had worn thin. She paused at the threshold of her study, a room Thomas rarely entered. The door hinges squeaked slightly as she pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of paper and the faint lavender sachets she kept in the drawers. Jessica switched on the lamp, its warm glow illuminating the neat stacks of books and bills on the desk. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk, hearing the familiar scrape of wood against wood, and pulled out a thick, spiral-bound report. Its blue cover, faded from months of handling, the corners softly dog-eared. Reflections, she'd titled it, started in a burst of private anguish 6 months earlier when the quiet between her and Thomas had begun to feel unbreachable. The report had become her companion, part diary, part therapy, a chronicle of everything she couldn't say aloud. The pages rustled as she turned them, her fingertips catching on the paper. Jessica's handwriting stared back, at times shaky, at times forceful, cataloging moments she felt invisible, logging unspoken hurts, the slow accumulation of distance. The black ink had faded slightly on the earliest pages, making her words seem like they were receding into the past. March 17th. Today T walked past me in the hallway without seeing me. I was standing right there. The words still stung, even months later. There were passages about her mother's long struggle with depression, the memory of pill bottles on the nightstand, the drawn curtains, the way her father had tiptoed around the house. Jessica had documented her own ambivalence about motherhood, the relief mixed with guilt when pregnancy tests came back negative, and the literary ambitions she'd suffocated in favor of stability. In these pages, written late at night while Thomas slept, she'd wondered if he ever truly saw her, or if the gentle routines of their marriage were simply camouflage for loneliness. The weight of the evening now demanded honesty, or at least the courage to reveal what she had kept hidden. Jessica glanced at the mantel clock, its soft ticking marking time. Her heart pounded so loudly she could feel it in her throat. She tucked the report under her arm, the spiral binding pressing against her skin, and returned to the kitchen, pausing for one deep, fortifying breath that filled her lungs completely. The conversation in the dining room had softened. The clinking of dessert plates and scraping of forks against china indicated the meal was winding down. Coffee was being poured, the rich aroma drifting into the hallway. She entered the dining room, report in hand, and the sight drew attention. The warmth of her guests, chatter ebbed, silence gathering quickly like an incoming tide. "Thomas," she said gently, her voice steady but full of meaning. "After everyone leaves, I'd like you to read something." She did not elaborate. She saw the confusion and worry flicker across his face, the way his eyebrows drew together, then relaxed in that familiar expression of concern. A momentary strain appeared in Olivia's brow as well, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. But Jessica met her husband's eyes, not flinching from his questioning gaze. "It's time for both of us to be truthful." Her words ricocheted around the room, changing the tone of the night. The guests, sensing a shift, began making polite excuses to leave. Chairs scraped against the floor, handbags were collected with soft thuds and the rustling of fabric. Jessica began to collect the plates, the ceramic warm from the recently served dessert. Her hands calmer now. With the unsaid finally hovering in the open air, she felt, for the first time that Easter, the possibility of something other than dread, perhaps even the start of forgiveness. The last guest's goodbye echoed in the hallway, the front door closing with a definitive click that seemed to seal the three of them inside together. Olivia, suddenly smaller, lingered near the garden window, twisting a silver ring on her finger, the metal catching the light with each nervous rotation. Jessica sat at the edge of the sofa, feeling the firm cushion beneath her, the report unopened in her lap, gaze fixed on Thomas as he collected stray wine glasses, trying to delay the inevitable. The soft clink of glass against glass punctuated the silence. When he finally sat beside her, the sofa creaking slightly under his weight, the hour felt heavier for the silence they'd both preserved. Thomas rested his hands on his knees, his knuckles white with tension, and it was Olivia who first spoke, offering a faint, "Should I leave for a bit?" Her voice cracked on the last word, but Jessica shook her head, her voice soft but firm. "No. Whatever needs to be said should be heard." The ticking of the clock seemed louder now that the house was empty of other guests. Thomas nodded, gathering himself with a long, slow breath that expanded his chest visibly. "I met Olivia's mother, Hannah, my senior year at the University of Washington." He wiped his palms on his pants, a nervous gesture Jessica had seen countless times. We dated almost a year. When we split, I thought it was over. A clean break, no bitterness." He offered a glance at Olivia, then to Jessica, an apology in each movement. "Hannah never told me she was pregnant." Olivia bit her lip, blinking rapidly, her eyelashes dark against her pale skin. Thomas continued, his voice catching. "I came back to California, got the teaching job. I never heard from her again." The radiator clicked in the corner, adding its own rhythm to his story. "If I'd known..." He stopped, his jaw clenched, the muscle visibly tightening as he fought emotion. Jessica watched him, saw the hurt in the deepening furrow of his brow, the regret in his slumped shoulders, the way his hands formed fists, then relaxed, over and over. "3 weeks ago," he went on, "Olivia sent me a letter." He reached into his pocket, pulled out an envelope, creased from being folded and refolded, the paper making a soft sound as he handled it. "She introduced herself, told me Hannah had passed, that she was..." He shook his head as if reeling from the word, "that she was my daughter. I didn't know how to tell you, Jess. I was afraid if I did, what we had left might shatter." In the silence that followed, Jessica drew a shuddering breath that filled the room. She felt the rawness of his confession, the magnitude of what had been withheld, and the ache of having been kept in the dark. Outside, a car passed on the street, its headlights briefly illuminating the room through the blinds, sweeping across their faces. But she also saw the fear in Thomas's eyes, of loss, of hurting her, and for the first time since Olivia's arrival, Jessica's anger wavered, replaced by a profound and vulnerable grief that belonged to them both. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his sleeve, feeling the familiar texture of his sweater. She passed him the blue-bound report, her hand trembling only a little, the pages rustling as they exchanged hands. "Then let's start over. By being honest, Thomas. All the way honest, tonight." He nodded, silent tears tracing the lines in his face, lines she knew, suddenly, with the clarity of a heartbreak's dawn. A tear dropped onto the cover of the report, leaving a small dark circle on the blue cardstock. It was late. The grandfather clock in the hallway had chimed 11 some time ago, its resonant tones fading into the night. The flow of words around the table earlier had faded into a concentrated hush, punctuated only by the distant heartbeat of the Pacific beyond the glass, waves crashing rhythmically against the shore. Jessica shifted the blue-bound report in her lap, feeling its well-thumbed weight, the corners softened from handling. Thomas, hands folded and face drained of color, awaited what would come, her truths, finally unsealed. She cleared her throat, finding her voice rougher than expected, as if rusty from disuse. "I started writing this when I realized I couldn't talk to you," she began, running her finger along the spiral binding. "I was so afraid of my own feelings, afraid they'd break us." Olivia lingered nearby, perched on the arm of a chair, delicate as a shadow. The fabric of her skirt made a soft whisper as she shifted position. Jessica glanced at her, noting the uncertainty in her posture, then fixed her gaze on Thomas. His eyes, red-rimmed and weary, met hers. She started to read, voice trembling at first, gaining strength as memories spilled out. Afternoon spent alone, the kitchen echoing with silence. Nothing but the ticking clock and occasional drip from the faucet for company. The growing pressure of friends, questions, no children yet, and her own secret relief paired with shame. The pages rustled as she turned them, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "I watched my mother fade away," she read, her voice steady now. "Year after year, the curtains drawn, pills rattling in orange bottles by her bed." She described her mother's long descent into depression, the energy it drained from their home, and the gnawing terror that she might inherit that darkness herself. Thomas's breath caught audibly at this. They had rarely spoken of Jessica's childhood. She let Thomas hear her confessions about the writing career she'd put away, scripts and stories abandoned in the attic, manuscripts gathering dust in boxes while she excelled at being a wife, at making a home spotless and presentable. The leather of the sofa creaked as Thomas shifted his weight, absorbing her words. "There were days," she continued, "when I'd stand in the garden, shears in hand, cutting roses for the table, and wonder if anyone would notice if I simply walked away." Her finger traced a line on the page. "A sort of emptiness grew like ivy around my heart, choking everything else. There were not only laments, but small betrayals. I sometimes looked at you," she admitted, "and wondered if you already saw me slipping away. Sometimes, I didn't answer when you called because I wanted to see how long it would take you to look for me." In the silence between the turning pages, Thomas's breathing was heavy, stricken. The heating system clicked on, sending warm air through the vents with a soft whoosh. "I had no idea," he whispered, the words raw and honest. "I thought you were content, or at least resigned." Jessica felt exhaustion seeping into her bones. Yes, but also a release, a burden shed. "I was neither, or both, but I know I'm tired of pretending." She closed the report, the sound final and soft. Turning to Olivia, whose eyes were wide and attentive, she managed a tentative smile. "I'm sorry tonight has been so much truth all at once." The young woman's earrings caught the lamplight as she nodded. "But in some ways, I think it's a gift. Maybe it's time for a different kind of honesty in this house." Thomas's hand reached for hers across the sofa cushion, warm and tentative, a first step across the chasm of the past 15 years. Their fingers threaded together, awkward, but real. The clock ticked steadily in the background. Olivia, silent and teary-eyed, watched their small reconciliation with a longing that seemed to stretch across the entire room, filling the space between them with unspoken hope. With the Harrington home now cloaked in vulnerability, the moment came for Olivia's story. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling softly around the eaves, tree branches scraping occasionally against the windows. She sat with perfect posture on the edge of the armchair, her composure belied by the nervous pulse visibly throbbing at her temple. The lamplight cast soft shadows across her face, highlighting her resemblance to Thomas even more clearly. Jessica poured her a glass of water from the pitcher on the coffee table, ice cubes clinking against the sides. Thomas and Jessica waited, patient and open, the air fragile but expectant. Jessica noticed Olivia's hands, slender like Thomas's, with the same tapered fingers, clutching a tissue, folding and unfolding it methodically. Olivia's words spilled in hesitant increments, her voice gaining strength as she continued. And my mom, Hannah, never spoke about college. She kept old photos in a shoebox, but never showed them to me. She took a sip of water, the glass trembling slightly in her hand. She raised me alone in Portland. Our apartment was small, but it had these huge windows that let in all the rain-filtered light. A wistful smile crossed her face. We had enough, but not much more. She fiddled with her ring again, twisting it around her finger, the metal catching the light. Mom worked at a bookstore. She knew everything about literature. That's where I got it from. Her gaze slipped past the couple to some memory only she could see, her eyes softening. She was diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago. Olivia's voice cracked, and she paused, swallowing hard. The ticking of the clock filled the silence. It was just the two of us through all of it. Chemo, hospitals, hospice. Her voice broke briefly, the tissue in her hand now shredded. I can still smell the antiseptic, hear the beeping of machines. Thomas blinked away tears, the moisture catching the light. Jessica felt them sting at her own eyes, compelled by the rawness in Olivia's confession. She reached for Thomas's hand, feeling his fingers tighten around hers. She didn't tell me about you until last fall, Olivia continued, looking directly at Thomas now. I don't know why. Pride, maybe, or fear I'd be hurt if you never wanted to know me. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so like Thomas that Jessica felt her heart constrict. She was in hospice by then. She gave me an old letter and your name. After her mother died, Olivia explained, the silence was immense. The furnace kicked on, adding its soft drone to the background. I spent weeks just sitting in our empty apartment, trying to feel something besides numb. The neighbors brought casseroles that piled up in the fridge. I started looking for you because I couldn't finish grieving without answers. She leaned forward slightly, her elbows on her knees. I didn't want your money or anything. I just wanted to see where I came from. I had one letter from college, and that's how I found you. The paper in her pocket crinkled as she touched it, a tangible link to her past. Jessica studied her reserve, her carefulness. She realized that Olivia's posture, her reluctance to presume anything, was not unlike her own. Jessica had grown so self-contained that she'd failed to see it as common ground between them. I was terrified, Olivia admitted, fingers twisting in her lap, the tissue now completely shredded. That I'd ruin whatever family you had. I still am. Her voice caught. But I hoped you might want to know me anyway. Thomas began to speak, but stopped, overwhelmed, his breath catching audibly. Jessica stepped into the silence, feeling the weight of responsibility. You're here now, Olivia. Whatever happens, you're part of this story too. The words hung in the air, fragile but genuine. Outside, a car door slammed somewhere. Down the street, the sound muffled by distance. A truce of sorts settled on the room. 3 people, bound by secrets and sudden revelations, circling the possibility of forging something new, even as grief and gratitude struggled for primacy. In each heart, the grandfather clock chimed midnight, 12 resonant tones marking the end of Easter Sunday and the beginning of something entirely unknown. The house felt altered the next morning, as if its foundation had subtly shifted beneath their feet. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows at a different angle, illuminating dust motes Jessica hadn't noticed before. She rose early, drawn to the quiet sanctuary of her kitchen, the cool tile floor against her bare feet grounding her after a night of fitful sleep. The refrigerator hummed as she opened it, surveying the leftover food from yesterday's dinner. Jessica began breakfast: French toast, strawberries, and coffee, measuring ingredients with precision, the familiar routine steadying her trembling hands. The whisk clinked against the ceramic bowl as she beat eggs, the rhythm soothing her racing thoughts. She didn't know what else to do, so she leaned into the familiar, the scent of vanilla and cinnamon filling the kitchen. Thomas appeared first, shuffling in his slippers that whispered against the floor, offering a sheepish smile and a soft morning. Dark circles underlined his eyes, evidence of his own sleepless night. He hovered at the edge of the kitchen, uncertain, reaching for the coffee pot with tentative movements. Jessica marveled at how she saw him differently, no longer inscrutable, his flaws now as visible as his virtues, the slight slouch of his shoulders, the way he avoided direct eye contact when uncomfortable. "There's cream in the door," Jessica said, breaking the silence. The sound of the refrigerator opening, the clink of the cream carton against glass, filled the awkward pause. Olivia arrived with a hesitance that was almost endearing, hair still damp from the shower, leaving small dark patches on the shoulders of her borrowed sweater. "Good morning," she said, her voice slightly hoarse from crying. She offered to help, slipping easily into the rhythm of the household, setting the table, the soft clatter of plates and silverware, slicing fruit, the knife making rhythmic thumps against the cutting board. They worked in companionable silence, the kind that felt, for the first time in ages, like potential rather than estrangement. As they sat to eat, the chairs scraping against the floor, Thomas watched the women, his wife and daughter, tentative but hopeful. Jessica passed the maple syrup, the glass bottle sticky against her fingers. Conversation began haltingly, but soon, Jessica and Olivia discovered unexpected common ground. "What kind of books do you read?" Jessica asked, cutting her. "French toast into neat squares." Olivia's face brightened, animation replacing caution. "Everything, really. But I love 19th century women writers. Jane Austen, the Brontes." A shared love of classic novels soon spiraled into a spirited argument about favorite authors. Jessica defending Austen, Olivia championing Toni Morrison. Their laughter filled the air, the sound bouncing off the kitchen tiles. It sounded brighter than it had in years. Thomas watched them, a piece of toast halfway to his mouth, forgotten as he absorbed the surprising rapport developing before his eyes. Later that morning, as sunlight warmed the living room floor, creating patches of heat on the hardwood, Olivia asked about Jessica's writing. "Dad said you used to write plays. Did any get produced?" The question was simple, but it reached Jessica in a private, tender place, like fingers pressing against a bruise. She felt her cheeks grow warm. "Just some local theater stuff, a long time ago," Jessica replied, her hands smoothing her pants reflexively. But Olivia pressed, curiosity sincere. "Will you let me read them?" The request hung in the air between them and offered bridge. Jessica glanced at Thomas, who nodded encouragement. His coffee mug paused halfway to his lips. I think I'd like that," she answered, surprised at her own response. The tentative connection between stepmother and stepdaughter surprised all three. Thomas felt a strange sense of relief, guilt quietly lingering, but no longer. Absolute, as if the first fragile roots of a new family dynamic might survive, even in uncertain soil. He reached for Jessica's hand across the table, his palm warm against hers, and she didn't pull away. Outside, the Monterey sun burned away the morning mist, light reflecting off the windows of neighboring houses. Inside, something like possibility drew its very first breath, fragile but undeniable, as tangible as the scent of coffee and cinnamon that still hung in the kitchen air. As April waned, the Harrington home shifted with the season. Mornings arrived misty and mild. Curtains drifted on salt air, carrying the hopeful scent of growing things. The sound of birdsong filtered through open windows earlier each day, creating a natural alarm clock that roused the household. Jessica claimed the sunroom for her own, dusting off her old laptop, the keys slightly sticky from disuse, and a stack of aging notepads that had migrated from the attic back into her daily life. The wicker chair creaked beneath her weight as she settled in each morning, the cushion molding to her body. She wrote in the quiet hours, at first timidly, fragments, recollections, beginnings of stories she'd long abandoned. The soft tapping of keys filled the sunroom, occasionally punctuated by long pauses as she searched for words. Words flowed haltingly, like a language relearned from memory, but each line revived a lost part of her. She could sense the household, shifting too. The floorboards no longer creaked in the same places. New paths were being worn as three people learned to navigate shared space. Thomas, a man always wedded to his habits, had started coming home earlier from campus, the sound of his car on the driveway now arriving well before dusk. At first it was an act of penance, but soon it became something more hopeful. The pleasure of returning to a home where the air no longer felt brittle with secrets. Some evenings, he would linger at the kitchen table, rifling through old manuscripts Jessica had tucked away, the pages making soft, shuffling sounds as he turned them. One Sunday afternoon, she found him sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by stacks of her work, glasses perched on his nose and intent as a student. The afternoon light caught the silver in his hair, highlighting how much he'd changed over their years together. At first, Jessica bristled at the sight, her heart racing with the urge to snatch the pages back, pull the curtain on all she'd once buried. But Thomas looked up, his eyes unguarded behind his reading glasses, and simply said, "Jess, these are beautiful. Why did you ever stop?" The honesty in his voice, its lack of irony or the need for reassurance, pierced through her defenses. The clock ticked steadily in the background as she considered his question. She sat beside him on the carpet, feeling its rough texture against her legs, their shoulders touching, and let herself be truly seen, flaws and all. Physical closeness returned to them, not the hurried, half-hearted affection of routine, but a careful, earnest intimacy, quiet nights listening to old jazz records, the needle occasionally scratching against vinyl, falling asleep with fingers entwined, the sheets rustling as they shifted closer, rediscovering the gentle terrain of each other's touch, the soft intake of breath, the warmth of skin against skin. Meanwhile, Olivia's visit stretched on into spring. What had been intended as a weekend became a week, then a month. She slowly let herself inhabit the house, to claim a shelf in the hall closet, her books making a satisfying thud as she arranged them, to add her jacket to the row by the door, the fabric brushing against Thomas's coat, to leave teacups in the sink, lipstick marks on the rim evidence of her presence. Olivia and Jessica grew closer through small moments, shared mornings spent reading, pages turning in synchrony, quiet afternoons trading lines from novels across the kitchen table, voices lowering in appreciation of particularly beautiful passages. Thomas often witnessed these exchanges from the doorway, hearing their laughter mingle, watching as they leaned toward each other in conversation with a sense of awe and humility. He saw two versions of love, one hard-won, the other brand, new, take root alongside each other. By the time Easter lilies had faded, dropping their white petals onto the windowsill, the family was different, delicate and stronger than before. The house creaked and settled at night as it always had, but the sound now seemed to embrace three people, each member learning, tentatively, how to belong together. Summer brought longer days and warm, honey-colored evenings that stretched endlessly. The Monterey fog retreated earlier each morning, burning off to reveal cloudless blue skies. Through the open windows came the distant sound of children playing at the beach, their laughter carried on the breeze along with the tang of salt and sunscreen. Olivia's planned return to Portland was delayed again and again, first by a week, and then a month, until the calendar pages turned to July without concrete plans. She began to consider Monterey more seriously as home, her voice losing its hesitancy when she mentioned staying. It was not a choice made lightly. Her small apartment in Portland still held boxes of her mother's possessions, photo albums stacked in the closet, memories embedded in every corner. Jessica found her one afternoon sitting on the guest bed, now unofficially Olivia's, holding a framed photograph of Hannah, fingers tracing the glass. "She would have wanted me to find you," Olivia said, the frame making a soft sound as she set it on the nightstand. "But I don't know if she expected me to stay." The bed springs creaked as Jessica sat beside her, the mattress dipping under their combined weight. Jessica, meanwhile, confronted feelings she'd never let rise to the surface. She'd made peace with not having children of her own, or so she'd thought. Now, in the presence of an adult stepdaughter, she felt both gratitude and grief. There were moments, watching Olivia and Thomas laugh over dinner, their forks pausing mid-air as they caught each other's expressions, or folding towels that somehow now smelled like a different shampoo, when a pang of longing would grip her ear sharp and unbidden. Instead of turning away, Jessica let herself feel these complexities. Sometimes she would speak them aloud, late at night, her voice raw and careful in the darkness of their bedroom. "I don't know how to be a mother," she confessed to Thomas one night, the sheets rustling as she turned to face him. "Sometimes I don't even know how to be myself." The air conditioner hummed softly in the background, providing a counterpoint to her vulnerable words. But as the weeks went by, and as Olivia became more comfortable, leaving books open on the porch, the pages fluttering in the breeze, calling Jessica for recipe advice, the phone pressed between ear and shoulder as she tried to salvage a failing sauce, sharing music on long car rides, her fingers tapping against the dashboard in rhythm, Jessica realized she could shape her own way of belonging. Not a mother, not exactly, but something solid and trusted. The roles they created demanded no labels, only presence. Thomas struggled too. He made mistakes, awkward attempts to fix things with overt gestures, like the too expensive necklace for Olivia's birthday that sat unopened on her dresser for days, the occasional lapse into withdrawal when overwhelmed, disappearing into his study with the door firmly shut, the sound of his typing a staccato barrier. He sometimes called Olivia by the wrong name or failed to ask about her day, only to recognize the misstep when Jessica soothed him later with gentle reminders. "It's new for all of us, Tom. It's okay to learn as we go." The bedside lamp, casting soft shadows across his troubled face. What mattered was his resolve to apologize, to stay present, to keep showing up. "I missed 23 birthdays," he said to Olivia one evening, his voice thick with emotion as they sat on the back steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in watercolor strokes of orange and pink. "I can't get those back. But I'm here for this one." The wood step creaked beneath them as Olivia leaned against his shoulder, their silhouettes merging in the fading light. In late July, Olivia told them she wanted to apply for a job at the local bookstore. The announcement came over breakfast, the words nearly lost under the crunching of toast. "And I think I could be happy here," she added, stirring her coffee, the spoon clinking against the ceramic. Her declaration was met with celebration and only a hint of nervous laughter. That night, the three of them sat on the back porch, and wooden floorboards warm beneath their bare feet, watching the last orange threads of daylight vanish behind the cypress trees. Fireflies blinked in the gathering darkness, tiny pulses of light appearing and disappearing among the garden. Shrubs, each felt the ache of change, and also, finally, the soft but steady hum of family knitting itself together, stitch by imperfect stitch. December brought an ocean chill and a hush to the house. Mornings dawned with windows fogged from the contrast between heated rooms and the cold outside world. The furnace clicked on more frequently, sending warm air through the vents with a reassuring whoosh. For Jessica, Christmas had always been routine, traditions performed for their own sake, more habit than joy. This year, With Olivia in Monterey, the annual rhythms felt uncertain, unsettled. The trio spent hours together in the living room, stringing ancient lights across the pine tree they'd selected together at the lot downtown. The sharp scent of evergreen filled the house, mingling with cinnamon and cloves from Jessica's simmering pot on the stove. They sorted through Thomas's mismatched ornament collection, tattered things saved from college, from their early marriage, each one tinkling softly as they were hung on fragrant branches. Olivia contributed unfamiliar keepsakes from her childhood, popsicle stick frames and salt dough handprints, the paint chipped but the memories intact. "My mom made this with me when I was 7, she explained, holding up a lopsided star, the glitter flaking off onto her fingers. The tree lights reflected in her eyes, which shimmered with unshed tears. "We had this tradition where we'd make one new ornament every year." Jessica was sensitive to Olivia's sense of loss. There were quiet moments when she caught the younger woman gazing into the glow of the tree, her mind surely on her mother and the Christmases now gone forever. Jessica would find her own throat tightening in response, a sympathetic ache blooming in her chest. On those days, Jessica found herself fiercely protective, not so much of territory, but of memory and dignity. One afternoon, as rain ticked against the window like tiny fingernails, Jessica gently suggested, "Let's do something for your mom. Would you show me one of her favorite holiday recipes?" The mixing bowls clattered as she pulled them from the cupboard, metal ringing against metal. Olivia smiled through tears, and together they baked gingerbread cookies, Hannah's recipe, written out in looping cursive on a faded card, the edges soft from handling. The scent of nutmeg and molasses filled the house, mingling with laughter, and, at last, shared nostalgia. Flour dusted the countertops like fresh snow, and the rhythmic sound of the rolling pin against dough provided a comforting background to their conversation. "Mom always said the secret was in how thin you rolled the dough," Olivia demonstrated, her hands confident despite the emotional weight of the moment. New traditions were born, naturally. They went to the downtown lighting ceremony together, standing shoulder to shoulder in the crowd, breath forming small clouds in the cold air as they counted down with strangers. Jessica and Olivia picked out a new tree skirt, their fingers brushing as they both reached for the same one. Moment of unspoken agreement. Thomas bravely attempted to hang a wreath and failed spectacularly, the ladder clattering to the ground while the wreath hung comically askew, giving them a story for years to come. In small but undeniable ways, the two women built a space for each other, independent of Thomas. Jessica delighted in Olivia's book recommendations, pages turning late into the night as she discovered new authors. And Olivia admired Jessica's knack for piecing together words and moments into meaning, often sitting quietly in the sunroom as Jessica wrote, the only sounds the clicking of keys and occasional sips of tea. Watching them, Thomas was filled with both gratitude and a subtle sense of exclusion, a realization that his family had expanded well beyond what he could control or predict. He would stand in the doorway, coffee mug warm between his palms, observing their easy interaction, Olivia's laugh so like his own, and feel a complex mixture of joy and wistfulness. He was happy, deeply so, but humbled too. Love, he realized, was not just about holding tight, but knowing when to step out of the way and simply watch it unfold. As frost crept across the garden, etching delicate patterns on the windows that caught the morning light, and the holidays drew close, the Harrington home stood changed and weathered, imperfect, but kinder, stitched together by new rituals and a shared willingness to begin again. The old grandfather clock in the hallway still marked the hours, but its chimes now seemed to count moments of connection rather than emptiness. Easter morning returned to Monterey, this time cloaked in a sense of anticipation rather than dread. Outside, spring fog clung to the cypress trees, dissolving slowly as the sun strengthened. Jessica's hands moved deftly through the kitchen, arranging daffodils, Olivia's favorite, their yellow trumpets still tight in the cool morning. Alongside, the lilies she'd always chosen herself. The stems made a soft snipping sound as she cut them at an angle. Sunlight poured over the counters, bathing everything in a hopeful, forgiving glow, highlighting specks of dust she would have once frantically wiped away. The house, too, had changed since last year. The walls, recently repainted in a warmer shade Jessica had finally chosen after years of indecision, seemed to breathe differently. Olivia's laughter drifted down the hall as she FaceTimed her fiancé, Marcus, who would be joining them for dinner. Her voice rose and fell in animated conversation, punctuated by the occasional crackle of the digital connection. The guest list had grown, not just by one, but by the quiet acknowledgement of all the old wounds and new joys that had collected over 12 months. "Should we put Marcus next to your father or across from him?" Jessica called, laying out name cards on the dining room table, the cardstock making a satisfying sound as she placed each one deliberately. Definitely across," Olivia answered, appearing in the doorway, phone still in hand. "Dad's interrogation techniques need some distance to be effective." Her smile took any sting from the words. Even the table was different. The leaf, added in the center to create new space, a far cry from last Easter's careful, brittle symmetry. The silverware clinked as Jessica arranged it, no longer obsessing over perfect alignment. Thomas hovered near the stove, whisking eggs, the metal utensils scraping rhythmically against the bowl. He watched as Jessica and Olivia debated whether to seat Marcus next to Olivia or across from her, an argument half serious, half teasing, that ended with all three laughing, the sound bouncing off the kitchen tiles. Jessica felt the urge, for once, to simply observe. The earnestness in Marcus's smile when he arrived and handed her a bunch of freesias, their sweet scent immediately filling the entryway. The easy way Olivia placed a reassuring hand at his elbow, mirroring gestures she'd unconsciously learned from her father. The nervous clearing of his throat when Thomas first shook his hand. The two men taking each other's measure. As guests trickled in, neighbors, friends from the community theater, Olivia's co-worker from the bookstore, the old, gnawing silence was replaced by an easy, overlapping chorus of voices. Wine glasses clinked, chairs scraped against the floor, multiple conversations created a pleasant cacophony. Jessica found herself in the midst of it, amused by the chaos, no longer haunted by the pressure to present a perfect image. The rooms held both continuity and change, each person forging their own rhythm within the larger melody of the gathering. Dinner was lively, the food less meticulously presented but somehow tastier for it. The ham glistened under the chandelier, light steam rising in fragrant curls. Stories tumbled out, the disaster of Thomas's failed wreath, Olivia's first day at the bookstore where she'd knocked over an entire display of bestsellers, Marcus's attempt at surfing that had ended with a broken board and wounded pride. Silverware clinked against china, laughter erupted in waves, wine splashed into glasses. Jessica listened, contributed, and marveled at her role as matriarch, not by default, but by choice. She caught herself smiling at Olivia and Marcus as they performed a clumsy rendition of a favorite song from Olivia's childhood, giggling through forgotten lyrics, their hands intertwined on the tablecloth. Later, when the sun dipped below the bay, painting the water in streaks of amber and rose, Jessica slipped outside. The wooden porch steps creaked beneath her weight. She leaned against the railing, feeling the cold, salt air prickle her skin by, and let herself remember the Easter before, the hollow formality, the shock, and the fear of being forever shut out of her own life. What a difference honesty had made. How pain, when finally named aloud, could transform into connection. Thomas joined her, the screen door squeaking as he stepped onto the porch. He wrapped a sweater over her shoulders without a word, the wool soft and warm against her skin. Through the window, Olivia's laughter carried, followed by Marcus's gentle response. The clink of dishes being cleared provided a homey soundtrack. Jessica felt, at last, grateful for the life that had upended her expectations, and for the family that improbably, imperfectly, had taken shape around her. The Monterey house stood much as it always had, gray shingles weathered by salt and wind, jasmine spilling over the front gate in fragrant cascades. Yet inside, the atmosphere was alive with change and gentle clutter. Children's drawings attached to the fridge with mismatched magnets, manuscripts stacked under coffee mugs leaving circular stains on the paper, toys tucked into corners, the harmonious chaos of generations mingling. Jessica sat at her desk beneath the sunroom's window, feeling the warmth of April sunshine on her back. Her fingertips were dusted with cookie crumbs and ink, the sweet and bitter scents mingling. She was rereading the first copy of her newly published novel, a work inspired, in many ways, by the tangled journey her family had taken since that fateful Easter. The pages made a satisfying sound as she turned them, the binding still, stiff and new. The novel's acknowledgements page, full of gratitude and inside jokes, listed Thomas and Olivia first, followed by Marcus and, with a lump in her throat, her toddler granddaughter, Lily. Thomas, now newly retired, his academic regalia packed away in mothballs in the attic, swept past carrying a squirming Lily in his arms. Her chubby legs kicked against his ribs, baby shoes leaving marks on his sweater. He paused to marvel at Jessica's book as if seeing it for the first time, the cover art catching the light. "It's a real story, Jess," he said, eyes glinting. With pride, with all the hard parts left in. His wedding band, scratched and familiar, flashed in the morning sun as he handed Lily up for a kiss. Her soft cheek pressed against Jessica's, smelling of baby shampoo and the chocolate she'd snuck earlier. Olivia and Marcus, visiting from Seattle for Easter, filled the house with the energy of young parents. Marcus singing silly songs. That echoed down the hallway. Olivia expertly calming a tantrum with the quiet authority she'd developed. The floorboards creaked under their footsteps, pathways worn by new feet. Jessica felt pride blooming in her chest, mingled with a satisfaction she hadn't known was possible 5 years ago, when that first Easter had shattered and rebuilt her world. The day unfurled with rituals old and new, an egg hunt in the dew-laced backyard, grass dampening their shoes as Lily tugged at Olivia's hand, pointing with excited squeals at each colorful discovery. The table squeezed tight to fit everyone, chair legs scraping against the floor as spaces were made, laughter layering over one another like music, wine glasses clinking in toasts. After lunch, Thomas corralled everyone for a family photo, with the camera timer beeping its countdown, and as they crowded in, shoulders touching, Jessica was struck by the realization that her old ideas of family, narrow, inflexible, safely at a distance, had given way to something much messier and more vibrant. Later, as dusk settled over the coast, the air cooling rapidly as it often did in Monterey, Jessica slipped outside, notebook in hand, and breathed in the scent of wisteria on the breeze. Pen touched paper, leaving ink trails of thought. She thought of all she had lost: certainty, youth, the illusion of control, but also all that had grown in its place: courage, forgiveness, a fierce capacity for love she hadn't known she possessed. Inside, dishes clattered in the sink as Thomas and Marcus tackled cleanup, their voices a low counterpoint to Olivia's lullaby floating down from upstairs. The porch swing creaked gently beneath Jessica as she rocked, the rhythm soothing and familiar. Family, she realized, as Lily bounded past with a purple egg clutched in her fist, small footsteps pattering on the wooden planks, had become something she couldn't have designed or expected. And standing there, with her words in print and her heart, finally, laid open to every imperfect joy, the evening star appearing in the darkening sky, Jessica knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not in spite of that Easter 5. Years ago, but because of it. Not despite the painful honesty that had cracked them open, but because they'd had the courage to begin again, together. What did you think of the story? Leave a comment and rate this story from 0 to 10. What rating would you give it and why? 2 buttons will appear next to it. One to subscribe, if you haven't already, and the other to watch other interesting stories. Choose one. Thanks for watching this far. See you soon.